Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining me this evening. We're going to look at the design basics with a special eye on plant selection and how that fits into the design basics. So before we even start doing any planting, there's all kinds of considerations we have to take into account, such as location, the purpose of your yard, what you wish to achieve, what are you going to use your yard for? You've got to take inventory of what's already there, think about the design and what style you want. And of course, you've got to think about the maintenance. There's no point doing all this planning and designing if you can't take care of the maintenance. So keep that in mind when you're doing your design. And of course, there are other considerations also. First of all, location. Zone map, you all know what zone you're in. You're probably up in looks like 5A, 5B. And of course that can still vary depending on your lot itself. Think about what exposure you have. Is it in the sun? Is it full sun all day? Is it shady under trees? Are you trying to garden on the north side of a building, a tall building that's going to have a big shadow? Is it going to be windblown or is it sheltered? And again, rainfall under a big tree or conifers, you're not going to get the rainfall. It's going to act, those trees are going to act like a big umbrella. Or even on maybe the easterly side of a building, if the predominant winds are westerly, you might have a desert situation on the one side of a building. So keep that in mind when you're planning your garden. Also taking into account location, your type of soil. Is it acidic, neutral, or alkaline? Is it clay, sand, loam? And the topography is so important too, because on your own little lot, you can have microclimates. If this is north, then this is a sheltered area with the sun coming down and heating this area, and it's protected. So that could be a little microclimate. If you've got a low spot, you might have water pooling or a wet area. That's perfect for a bog garden. You're not going to put your alpine plants down here because obviously that would be too wet for them. They'd be much better suited up here. So again, you've got to know your property, and sometimes you don't plant right away. Sometimes you need to spend a year on a property and get to know your little microclimates and how the sun moves across the property and where the rain falls. And you've got to be very observant. So the purpose, why are you doing this landscaping? What do you hope to achieve? Do you just want, a perfect lawn for family entertainment or some sports? Is it about aesthetics? Do you want something that has a lot of curb appeal, something that people walk by and go, oh, wow, look at that? Food production. If that's important to you, then the prime real estate or the sunniest spot on the property is probably going to go to your vegetable garden. And maybe your goal is to get some privacy on your property. And, this one is a great example. They've got these big conifers plus a hedgerow of shrubs. So it's beautiful and it's obviously very private. And another goal could be biodiversity. If you're, want to do a pollinator garden or invite wildlife into your garden, then having a lot of different plants and probably native plants would be important to you. So it's really about what you want, and you're the only one who can decide that. So if this suits you, if you just want a specimen tree in your basic foundation planting, or the other half of this double, went all out and got rid of the turf and put all plants in. So it's really your taste and your effort and time to keep it clean and tidy. So, you decide what you want to do and how much you're willing to take on. And of course, as I said, you've got to take inventory of what's already there. So do up a quick sketch of your property. Put down the dimensions of the lot, exposure, which way it's facing, which way is north, And make note of what's there, not just what's on your own property, but your neighbor's tree also influences your property. So if there's a big structure here, you need to note that because that's going to cast a shadow at some point during the day, or deprive you of rainfall in that spot, or all of those things. So in this case, we've got, a driveway, a house, basic foundation planting, old swing set, old arbor seat, and trees all around, and a garden shed out back. So now you're saying, okay, what are we going to keep and what are we going to get rid of? Well, obviously, you're not going to get rid of the house and the driveway and the big trees because they're pretty big ticket items and take a long time to grow a tree. Oh, I forgot to mention, you're also the lot that was blessed with the hydro pad in the front corner of your lot. So you can't do anything about that. The hydro has an easement on your property, so you have to work around that. But let's say you've decided that the front foundation planting's looking tired and you want to do something that perks that up a bit. You never sit in this arbor, so that's got to go. And the kids have grown up, so they're not using that play set, so that can go too. So decide what you're keeping and what's going, and then you got your starting point. So now you've got to decide what exactly do you want from this property, from your yard. Well, first, you've got to remember which way the sun rises in the east, sets in the west. So it would probably track across your property like that. So you can look at shadows. Also think about entrance and exit to the building. So note where your doors, patio door, and windows are, because obviously you're not going to put a structure or plant right in front of that. And you need to think about easements, in this case, the hydro pad, and how you're going to access the property and where you need to direct lines of traffic. So if you need to get to that garden shed, which is the most direct way there. So all things that you need to keep in mind when you start your plan. And then let's look at what you might anticipate doing on this property. So a list of things you might consider is whether you want curb appeal or showcase on your property, whether you want a themed garden, specific plants, a vegetable garden, play area, entertainment space, fire pit, utility area, pool, water feature, shade, if you want to hide an eyesore, if you need grass, lawn, and if it needs to be child or pet friendly, and if you need lighting or fencing, all of these things, because when you're doing the work and the planning, these are all considerations that you should be thinking, like, are these things that I want to add, or make your list of what you do want to add, and then prioritize it. So curb appeal and hide an eyesore, let's say that was your number one priority, and they kind of go hand in hand. Hiding that hydro pad will add to the curb appeal. And then having some entertainment space might be important, or second most important. So that's number 2. And adding some shade to go with your entertaining space, that would be a good idea. And a vegetable garden, that could be your 4th goal. You can have more goals and you can have less goals, but just prioritize them, because then when you start having to make decisions, you can decide which ones you absolutely have to have and which ones you can sacrifice if necessary. So then map those out on your plan. So number 1, we said, was curb appeal and hiding an eyesore. Number 2 and 3 was entertainment space and shade. So it makes sense to have that off the patio door area. And number 4 was to have a vegetable garden. So to have a vegetable garden, you need sun. So this would be the sunny area for most of the day. Good access to the property, so you can, have access to the house, so you can put your tools in the garage or get in and out to, wash vegetables or bring vegetables in for dinner. So all of that makes sense. So now that you've got it mapped out, you've got to start thinking about the design. And this is where the design elements and principles come in. And landscape design is a full university degree course, and we're going to go over it in about half an hour. So this is just the highlights and, of course, just an overview of it, but some things that you can just keep in the back of your mind when you're looking at your garden saying, why isn't it working, or what works here and what doesn't? Okay, we're going to look at the elements and principles of design with an emphasis on plant selection. And design elements are the core issues of design, and the principles are the visual effect of those elements. And that'll become more apparent as we go through them. So the elements, and this is the same whether you do floral design, painting, interior design. So if you do those things, you've already got a head start here. So think about line, color, and of course that can be complementary, contrasting, neutral colors, focal. You can use color as a focal point. It can be monochromatic color scheme, texture, and that takes into account not just plants. That can be the hardscaping. It can be airy and soft plants and hard texture of stones, form and shape. And that's the three-dimensional versus two-dimensional. So conical would be a form and triangle would be a shape. Space and mass, so that's your voids versus your occupied space, and movement, and that can be literal and figurative. And we're going to look at all of those now. So line, you look at this picture, and this is downtown Brockville, and first thing you see is that beautiful curving line of begonias, and it really is emphasized in this because of the bright color against the turf. But you also get the curving lines reflected, the same curving lines you have in the bed reflected in the arching blades of the grass and the arching fronds from the grass. You also have, upright lines when you think about the structures and the lampposts and the trees. So line is always present in your landscape, but sometimes you have to work with it to make it a feature. Again, you've got the little conifers along this pathway. You've got the crisp and neat lines of the pea gravel walkway edged nicely, but then the bordering of the conifers, those golden conifers, just draws your eye straight down that pathway because it's so vibrant. Color, of course, very important in the garden, and there's all kinds of color themes you can use. This is a garden in Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, and they did the color wheel. So they've got the blues into the mauves, into the pinks and reds, and then oranges and yellows. And it was quite a huge border. Maybe not something we'd all want to take on smaller gardens, but it was very impressive. And of course, you can have hot colors, and I don't think anyone would argue that these are very bold and bright colors. And cool colors, again, very calming and cool colors. Oops. And color echo is a term you'll often hear used in design, and it's where you use a color in different forms through a garden, or you repeat the color from ornamentation, or the color in the structure, maybe the house on the property gets repeated in some of the accessories or even in some of the plants. So in this color echo, we've got Salvia plumosa, Sedum xenox, and a nice plum colored heuchera. And you can see that color in different shades repeats throughout those three plants. And this is the garden in Kingston that was on the garden tour that we hosted when we did the convention. And this lady's garden, you either loved it or hated it. I loved it. I heard some people going, wow, that paint must have been on sale, because she painted all her accessories the same blue color. And she used it quite extensively in the garden. So you see that blue repeats quite often in the garden. But to me, it unified the garden, and, there was no doubt that you were still in her garden, even at the very back part of it behind a hedge, because that blue was still there. Texture in the garden, also very important. And as I said earlier, texture can be the hardscaping in the garden, but it's also, can be very well demonstrated with plants. We've got the light airiness of the paraskia, leathery leaves of the lilium, strappy leaves of daylilies, big bold leaves of hibiscus back here, spiky flowers on the verbascum, the threadleaf coreopsis here. So all different textures, and if everything was the same, it'd be boring. So by mixing things up, it makes it very interesting, and your eye just keeps moving through the garden. And a shady garden, you can have texture too, and sometimes you can have texture even using a lot of the same plants, like hostas. They come in the glossy, smooth foliage, very leathery foliage, very light and airy. Now you've got some that almost look like grasses, but in contrast, we've got the fern here in the foreground, the painted fern, heuchera here, and stone also, just as more texture contrast. And this was another OHA tour, but this is near Owen Sound. And again, all kinds of texture, the rubbery leaves of the sedum, creeping sedum in the foreground, succulent, airiness and wispiness of the switchgrass, the blades of the longer grasses. So you can see all the different textures, how they work together to add interest. And form and shape. So you'll see a lot of times mounding plants in the garden. You'll see upright plants. And if you look at some like delphiniums and lupins, you'll often get one, the central or the main floral spike, that is taller than the others. So it gives it that appearance of being triangular. I mean, I know it's technically not, but it does give that appearance. So you want to, again, mix up your mounding and your oval shaped plants and your vase shaped plants. And we'll just look at those a bit more in depth, because it's very interesting when you start looking at it that there are trees that are triangular shaped. Of course, conifer trees are mostly conical shaped. Kniphofia, the red hot poker plant, each flower is quite triangular on that. And again, here's a lupin, and you can see the main flower is much taller than the secondary flowers, and you get that triangle or pyramid shape to that plant also. Mounding forms or spherical forms, a beautiful maple, quite round, a globe cedar, again, very round, teddy bear sunflower, big round flowers on that one, and a mound of heuchera, again, very circular in shape. Columnar or rectangular, and you get skyrocket juniper, columnar oak, Carl Forster grass here, Calamagrostis Carl Forster, very columnar, and the foxtail lily, very columnar flowers on that one too. Vase shaped, not as common, but on this little red bud, it's quite vase shaped. Conifers, again, that's a common shape for them. Baptisia, almost a perfect vase shape on that one. And individual flowers that have that vase shape, if you look at a malva from the side angle, you'll see that it also has that vase shape. And another elements, space and mass. We said that was the voids versus the occupied space, because if everything was busy with plants and stuff going on, your eye wouldn't know where to go. It needs a place to rest. So you have your plain open areas, your grassy areas, and nothing above here, because you want to take in the pathway and the welcoming statuary going in there. And mass plantings of boxwood and mass plantings of what looks like hydrangea in the background. So that's the yin and yang of space and mass. And movement in the garden can be literal and figurative. Excuse me. So it's how your eye moves through the garden, how you move through the garden. So a pathway, a winding pathway makes you want to go around the corner and see what's coming next. And it can also be the movement of the plants. You'll get the irises swaying in the breeze and the grasses rustling and swaying in the breeze. So as I said, it's both actually how you do it, how you do it in your mind, and actually physical movement in the garden. So now the principles. So this is the visual effect of using those elements that we just discussed. So the principles themselves are repetition, rhythm, emphasis, balance and symmetry, proportion and scale, and unity and diversity. So repetition and rhythm. And this is a really great example because you can see repetition everywhere. The wallflowers, the Cheiranthus here, repeats in each of these ovals. The clip boxwood, you've got the wall, ball, ball, wall, ball, ball, wall, ball, ball, wall. So that's where you start to get into a rhythm where you can, you know, your mind starts to anticipate, to expect the next repetition. So there's a rhythm there. And I mean, they've repeated the plant matter, they've repeated the shapes, they repeated the color, the lines. So you can see how that unifies a garden by making things similar and familiar. Emphasis or focal point. And it can be a plant, it can be a statue, it can be a structure, and it can be seasonal. The big rhodo blooming at the front of the house might be the focal point in May, but in July, when it's just plain green foliage, something else may take over as a focal point. Now, in this photo, we've got a beautiful Japanese maple that's been pruned to perfection to show the beautiful branching structure, trunk structure. And of course, all the plantings around it have been toned down, kind of, basic plantings that put the emphasis on that Japanese maple. Balance and symmetry, and it doesn't have to be perfectly matched or perfectly balanced. It's their visual impact that is balanced or symmetrical. It's not about having the same things on each side. So if you've got the boxwood here in this shape, having a big line of boxwood up here balances it out. We've got a wall here, and we've got a countertop storage compartment here. So things are balanced, but they're not identical. They're not mirror reflections. And on this photo, it's a little more obvious. You've got the tree over here and another tree here. Not the same tree, but visually they balance each other out. You've got this big rock here, and you've got this big clump of ferns here. Now, I know physically they don't weigh the same, but visually they have almost the same balance or impact when you're looking at them. So those are things to keep in mind also. And proportion and scale. If you've got a big property, you can do big lawns and big borders and use big plants. And it would look funny if you had something, it would look out of place if you had something small there. So use what you've got to advantage and make sure things fit together. Unity and diversity. That's just saying that things can be similar, but they should still be different. So in this case, we've got a Daphne Carol-Mackie and a variegated Weigela. And they do have the same colors in them, but the texture is totally different between these two shrubs. So they look the same, therefore they're unified, but they're completely different in their foliage shape and texture. So there's also diversity there. And this is another garden from an OHA tour, again near Owen Sound. But to me, this kind of kind of wraps it up and shows it all together, how you can have repetition and rhythm. So you've got the coreopsis repeated throughout this whole area. You've got the glaucous blue-gray foliage of the fescue grasses that match the junipers, and they repeat back here. You've got sedum on this side, you've got sedum on this side, you've got a nice curving line. The bench, I think, would be your emphasis or focal point, because when you look down the path, that's where you're going. That's your goal or your destination. You've got balance and symmetry because of the use of the plant material on each side, and the upright here of a lamppost matches the upright of the tree trunk here. And yes, things I would say are in proportion and scale, big open area, but they've used big plantings to fill it out. And there's definitely unity and diversity there, because you've got spiky textures, you've got spiky uprights here, you've got the rubbery foliage here. So you've got unifying the colors, but totally different textures. I think there's a lot going on here, but it all works together. And, at first glance, we'd all say, well, that's pretty, but it's not until you start analyzing it and then you see why it's pretty. It's all the different design elements and principles at play. And I saw this quote in English Gardener magazine. I thought it just made sense to include it because, it says a border, no matter how big or small, should have rhythm. Repetition of key plants gives structural and color flow. The brain looks for similar forms, and this carries the eye along and around a border, giving both movement and cohesiveness. And the easiest way to include some repetition, especially if you're adding a new bed to your landscape, is to use some material from your existing beds. If you're extending a bed, just take some of the plants from the existing bed and put those on the new part, because then you're going to not have what looks like an add-on. It'll look like it belonged there all along. And the garden should always be a journey of discovery. You don't want to see everything at first glance. This is a beautiful garden in Hudson, Quebec, and they have this beautiful stone sculpture, and you keep getting glimpses of it as you're walking through their garden. It's a large property. I think it was 4 acres, and just done beautifully. And you'd say, oh, wow, I'm going to go see that. But then the path would take you somewhere else, and then you'd get another glimpse of it. And eventually you did come up to it and got to appreciate it full on, but it's kind of like teasing you to continue on your journey through the garden. And this was in Hudson, Quebec also. It was a beautiful little woodland garden, and you're walking down a pathway and you can hear water running. And then there's a break in the canopy of the trees and shrubs, and you see this beautiful pond, and you realize, well, there's the pond, but that doesn't, explain the sound of running water. So you continue on the pathway, and you come to another opening, and there's this beautiful waterfall and another pond, and it's got, the Japanese maple and the dappled willow and the pedicites and ligularia and all the water-loving plants, tons of mosses growing, and that's your reward for the journey through the woodland path, which itself was no hardship. But you can see what I mean about making it a journey of discovery. And think about what style you want in your garden. Of course, we have formal and informal styles, and formal generally has straight lines, very balanced and symmetric, a lot of repetition of plant material versus a lot of different plant types. And examples of formal style would be Baroque or French parterre or Rococo. Informal, very curving lines, and it can be asymmetric or symmetric. A lot of different plants, and the cottage garden or Asian garden is a good example of informal styles. So we don't have gardens like Versailles anymore, which of course is a very formal style, but these are modern day formal style gardens. So you've got your parterre here, but instead of boxwood and annuals, they've put their vegetables in. So it's formal but informal. This one has a formal feel just because of all the straight lines, repetition of plant material. Things are very balanced and symmetrical. And this one, again, straight lines, same plantings, two trees, as columns almost as the entry to the garden, and then two pots balanced here. So very formal feeling to this garden also. Versus these gardens, which are very informal with curving lines, plants in no particular pattern, different colors, textures, all mixed together, a riot of color, a riot of texture and foliage, and very comforting and comfortable feeling. You want to relax in these gardens as opposed to just walk through the other gardens. So going back to our plan we were working on before we start to look at the design principles. So just as a refresher, we've got our desire to add some curb appeal and hide an eyesore. We want some entertainment space and shade, and we want a vegetable garden. So your garden might end up looking something like this. So we've put a curving walkway in instead of the old angular one. We've extended the garden so we don't just have foundation planting. We put nice curving lines in, and we've repeated some of the plant material from the front gardens over to the new garden bed near the hydro pad. Now, you can plant around the hydro pad. Just remember, they do have a right-of-way, an easement on that. So probably a good idea to use perennials or grasses and not shrubs, because if they do trample perennials or grasses, they will come back. If they trample shrubs, you're going to have broken branches. And probably best to leave one side open where they can get access to it. Now, again, repeat things throughout the garden so that you get balance and that your eye flows through. These things represent rocks, so a different texture there, similar use of plants. And then at the back, we put a nice big curving patio bed in. We're trying to avoid straight lines again if we can. And these triangles are shade sails, and I'll show you what I mean by that if you don't know in a minute. And our vegetable beds, so 3 raised vegetable beds just off the garage for quick access. These is what I mean by shade sails. So if you don't have natural shade, you can put these up. Beauty of these is that, of course, you set them up so that you get maximum shade at the times you need it, but you can take them down during the winter so that you're letting the light in during the winter and then put it back up in the summer or spring again. So that's the shade sails I was mentioning as an option. And if you've got the hydro pad on your property, this is an option too, is buying a fake rock to put over it. Or it's also makes a great well cover if you've got the drilled well. So those are available online, much cheaper in the States. If you overwinter in the States, bring one back with you. Now, maintenance. As I said earlier, it's no point doing all this design and putting new gardens in if you're just created more work for yourself. So always keep the maintenance in mind, and just remember, there's no such thing as a maintenance-free garden. Even if you pave it over, you're just going to have to sweep it off. So think about the plants. These are questions I would ask to try and determine if this is a plant you want in your garden, whether or not you consider it a low maintenance plant. Does it have a long bloom period? Does the foliage look good all season? Does it produce a lot of seed? Because if it does, you're going to need to deadhead that or be picking out little seedlings next year. Does it need shaping, or does it just grow to a nice shape on its own? And does it flop? Are you going to have to be tying it up, or is it going to hide another plant? Does it need special growing conditions? Because if you're trying to grow something that loves acidic soil and you're on the Canadian Shield, you're not going to be successful, or you're just going to give yourself a lot more work. So with an eye to keeping the maintenance as low as possible, some ideas would be to mulch, of course. This is a master gardener's little backyard. She's got it neat and tidy, but having a edging on the beds helps. So you've got something to whippersnip right up to. The mulch definitely helps for not having to water and to keep the weeds down. Plus, it just adds a great natural looking backdrop for the plant. She used the black mulch here, which of course kind of just fades into the background and highlights the plants. This is my front garden. I have wood chip mulch all throughout the garden. I use it between the plants as well as on the pathways. And it's a godsend. It keeps the weeds down. It keeps the moisture in because I don't water. I have a huge garden. I can't be out there watering. New plants get water, but then they're on their own. And just looking at this little yard here, this is in Port Elgin, and just visiting my brother walking down the street. I thought this was a really nice landscape, but I'm looking at it and thinking it just doesn't, it's not quite finished to me. To me, it just needs a bit of height, something to anchor that landscape to, or the house to that lot. So to me, it needs a tree in this corner. A Japanese maple would be ideal, but I couldn't find clip art for a Japanese maple, so we got a conifer. And then maybe some shrubs here to balance things out. And to me, that just makes it a little more complete. But, you know, if you liked it before, that's fine because it's your garden. And then this one's very similar in design, but does have some of those elements in, and you can see that it does make a difference. So they've used a lot of the same materials, the stone and low-growing plants, but then they have added some shrubs and things to get various levels of interest.
You want to come and watch this?
And other considerations for plant selection? Think about multiple seasons of interest in the garden. And of course, many people have personal reasons for picking certain plants and thinking about the environment. Certain plants, you want to encourage native plants in your area. So you know, keep that in mind if that's your goal. And of course, what pests you have in the area, that's going to determine your plant selection. And plant health at the point of purchase. So I just want to show a few ideas of multiple seasons of interest. This is a great tree. I know people who grow it in Ottawa, so you might, I think it'd probably be a similar growing zone to Ottawa, so you might be able to grow the Seven Sunflower tree. It blooms late in the season. It blooms late August, September. Beautiful blooms. The bees just love it. And once the flowers are finished, the bracts behind the flowers turn this bright red. And it's almost like you have a second set of blooms. And then the foliage, not the foliage, the bark exfoliates. And you get to see this beautiful bark all winter in the landscape. And the tree itself, if you've pruned it, can have a nice structure as well. And when it's not in bloom and when you're not looking at the bark, the foliage, the leaves look good. I don't ever see any pest problems on this tree. It always looks a nice deep green and healthy. So that's what I mean by multiple seasons of interest, not just a 1 week or 2 week bloom period, but things you can look at all season. And if you don't have room for ornamental trees, or if you want food production, get a fruit tree. Again, they flower, they can have beautiful branch structure, and you get fruit. So it's a win-win, and you can even get shade from a fruit tree. This is a species peony, and it blooms very early in the season. It's Molly the Witch is the common name because Molucwitzii is too hard to say. And it comes in pink or yellow. And as I said, very early in the season, but the foliage looks good the rest of the season. It's not your typical peony foliage, very glaucous, water beads up on it. And even the seed pods are quite interesting. So a plant that's going to give you more than just a week of bloom. Well, peonies sometimes can be less than that when you get the really hot days. Another plant I really like is my ornamental rhubarb. It's very deep pink when it first emerges, and then it puts on those flower spikes, and they're very tall. And when flowers are done and you deadhead it, you still have these beautiful leaves all season, and the underside is still that beautiful pink. If you don't have room for the big ornamental one, nothing says you can't grow your regular rhubarb in your ornamental garden and enjoy that big bold leaves and those red stems. So it's a good plant too. And native plants. There's great native plants that have long season of interest also. The mayapple comes up, and it's very neat how it emerges in the spring. Has a cute flower, followed by an edible fruit. Just don't eat too many of them. They won't agree with your stomach, but they are edible and they're actually tasty. And depending on the year, if in the location, if we have a non-drought year, which we haven't had for a while, the foliage stays green all summer and is just big, lush, quite big leaves, maybe 12-inch wide leaves, and they look good all season. But if we have a drought, then they do go dormant. And plant selection for sentimental reasons. I know many people who say they have the peonies from their mother's garden or their grandmother's garden. And many people nowadays plant trees on special occasions, birth of a grandchild, and then every year the child gets to measure their tree and see how much it's grown. So sentimental reasons, we do plant things for different reasons. And one reason can be if you're this gentleman was an entomologist, so he was very interested in bugs, but he also wanted to see if he could recreate a prairie grassland. And this is near Constance Bay, which is on the Ottawa River, just northwest of Ottawa. And he had to get permission from the city of Ottawa to do this, because obviously you could get neighbors complaining that he's not cutting his grass, but this is intentional. These are all prairie grasses and prairie flowers that you would see. And he was studying the insects to see if they would come back. There's actually one very tiny piece of natural prairie grasslands near his property. We went as a group, the Master Gardeners went to see this property, and he took us to this neighboring little natural prairie grass, and it's being slowly taken over by other plants. And some of the volunteers do try and keep the other plants out, but it's down to like maybe 50, maybe 75 square feet. So it is very quickly fading and disappearing away. This master gardener put in a couple acres of pollinator friendly plants. Her whole yard is plants. She has pathways throughout it. She's got all kinds of Rudbeckia and goldenrods and echinacea, roses even, sedums, so all different things that the pollinators like. And it was just beautiful. And I won't say it was low maintenance, because obviously that was a lot of work, and it's a lot of work to make sure things like goldenrod don't take over, but very rewarding. And you've got to, you're getting up north there in Sterling, so you probably have the same pests that we do out here in the country: rabbits and deer and groundhogs and raccoons and et cetera. So think about the plants and how you're going to grow them. Some will be more deer resistant than others. Sometimes deer fence is the only way, or deer repellents, animal repellents, I should say, because these ones like Plant Skid and Deer Away and Deer Fence, and those are the names I can think of. I'm sure there's more. They generally repel most herbivores. So, and they do work. My sister used to get deer in her hosta gardens, so she would spray them with the Deer Away, and the deer wouldn't eat her hostas for like the next 3 months until the Deer Away faded enough that she had to go spray it again. Plant health. When you're at the nursery, just make sure you're always picking out the healthiest plant. And I know that sounds silly to say, who would pick out the sickest plant, but sometimes you have to know what you're looking for. So it's got to be pest and disease free, should have a good root system, and it should be showing signs of vigor. So obviously, I think we're all going, yeah, I'll take the one on the right. So you can see that one's much more vigorous, much more healthy. And obviously the one on the left has something going on there, which, it'll be on the bargain bin. So that's one that, someone might want to rescue eventually at a cheap price. But if you're going to pay top dollar, pick your healthiest plant. And look at the root system. Nothing saying you can't take it out of the pot and take a quick look. Just do it respectfully and put it back in properly, and don't, leave it to dry out so that it dies. But this is a good, healthy root system. You can see the fresh white roots versus these that are going round and round and yellowing. And sometimes they're really pot bound. And the best thing you can do is, I tease them apart, but really you need to break them apart and get those roots spread out. Because if you just plop that in the ground, they're going to continue to go around and around as opposed to spreading out into the ground. So really work on them, keep them in water while you're doing it so that you're not letting them dry out, but work those roots apart so that you give that plant the best chance possible. And sometimes it takes drastic action to do that, but overall, you will be having a healthier plant if you do get the roots growing in an outward direction. And vigor, I mentioned this. Jeff Mason owns a garden center, Mason House Garden near Uxbridge, and he had a lady come in and say, "Oh, are you selling those annual echinacea again?" And he said, "No, echinacea are perennials." And she said, "No, ones I buy are always annuals." So he actually looked through his own shelves of plants and put these three together to show that when you're picking your plant in the garden center, you want to pick the one with the most vigor. And in this case, it would be this one. There's no energy going up into a flower. It's got the most growth through the base. It's got the most healthy leaves feeding the root system and establishing the root system. So this is the one you want. It may not bloom this year, but you're going to have a plant that makes it through the winter and be ready to bloom next year. Now, your second choice would be this one, because it does have some extra leaf growth at the bottom. So you know that it's a strong crown. You'd probably definitely need to sacrifice this flower this year. So cut it off and then let the plant put the energy into its root system and establishing itself. And then of course, this one is probably not going to make it to the next year. I mean, it still might. There's one shoot coming up there, but again, you'd need to sacrifice that flower for the first year. And of course, it's all in the details, and some people are more detail oriented than others, but this was an experience I had. I went to buy this Perovskia, and the tag said, the front of the tag said Perovskia Little Spire, and implied that it was a nice dwarf compact variety. But then you flip over the tag, and this is what it says. It's 1 meter by 1 meter, and it can be pruned shorter. Well, that's not a dwarf Perovskia. My regular Perovskia is about 1 meter tall. So, and having to prune it doesn't make it a short plant. I mean, it means it is short after you prune it, but I mean, calling it a short plant when you have to make it short is kind of a stretch to me. And keep some notes so that you know what you've got in your garden, or when you're planting a new bed, sometimes it makes sense to just put the list of plants down so that you can compare their shape and their texture and their bloom time and their colors, so that you know what you're putting together and you know their ultimate heights. So some people can do that just in their head or visually by actually, just saying, okay, I know this plant is this height and this one does this, so that will work well together. But if you're not able to do that, then sometimes putting it down on paper really helps. And of course, you can add even more details if you want. If you're really a note taker, you can say when it bloomed in the garden and where you planted it and where you purchased it, because usually when you have something beautiful, someone's going to say, "Where did you get that?" So if you keep notes, you've got it all. And just some examples of maybe putting it all together from some of the ideas we've looked at. Another OHA garden tour. This was a big garden. I think it used to be a farm field, but they obviously decided they wanted some more flowers or more garden space. So I mean, it was a young garden. The trees are very small, but they are growing. Big beds to match the big area, big plants. Eventually will be big trees, big structure, repetition of color. We've got the blues here and back here, yellows in the daylily and yellows in probably a Rudbeckia here and golds. So, you know, just works well together, formal lines, but still casual planting style. This is in the UK. And normally I wouldn't use a walled garden example when I'm talking design for here, but this was recreatable in our own environment, I thought, just up against a house. A good example of perennial bed with a lot of different colors and textures, good movement of height from the short in the front to the tall in the back, using that wall space, using airy plants like that scabiosa here, color repetition, the blues throughout, the purples. It all worked well to me. And again, it's personal taste too. What I think looks pretty, you may not. Backyard in Brockville, one of the members of the Horticultural Society here. Big yard on a busy street, and it's one that, you know, people slow down to take a look at. Again, repetition of plant material, repetition of color, the echinaceas, the pinks through here, and then you get it repeated in the spider plant here, hydrangeas, the whites, Heliopsis, Rudbeckia, all the bright golds. It just all seems to work well together, good scale, repetition of the colors and textures, works very well together. Little shade garden, and again we've got the Japanese maple as the focal point and all the other plants kind of as the supporting features. Good different textures with hosta, impatiens, geraniums, statuary, stone steps. So you get the lines going up to the front door, lines of the Japanese maples structure, the branching, and makes for a beautiful front yard. A little backyard, again semi-formal but very relaxing, some straight lines, beautiful uprights of the bark on this tree. I think it's actually uplit here, a little fountain that's been uplit, shrubs in balance at the back, would act as a great noise reducer. Grasses on both sides, giving you some balance. Repetition of some of the glaucous blue foliage on each side. So everything again just works so well together here. And again, it's just showing you that a small space doesn't have to look small. You can put a tree in it that's going to draw the eye upward. Use the vertical space of the taller shrubs in the background and all those different heights. Couple back gardens. I really like the one on the right. Nice curving lines, beautiful welcoming sitting area at the back. Repetition of some of the plant material to connect it. I mean, things have to grow in a lot still, but it's looking very pretty. This side, again, very informal, a lot of contrast of textures of the hardscape with the plants, beautiful curved bench and table fit together with the curving beds, uprights, different shapes and textures. And this is Judy Wall's garden at Rockwall Garden. She sells alpine plants, rock garden plants, and so this is a working garden. This is a demonstration garden of her plant material, but it still follows all the same design principles. So she's got repetition of color, repetition of texture, different shape plants, different heights and lines, and it all works together using those same principles. This pretty little garden is a front yard garden in Ottawa, and a master gardener did this one as a demonstration garden. She wanted to show that you could put together a beautiful garden that was completely drought tolerant. She used a lot of native plants, but also just did her research and picked drought tolerant plants. She used the lasagna method or sheet layering method of not taking the grass out. She actually just put the newspaper or cardboard down on the grass, then put compost and soil on top and planted in that. And she only watered to get it established, mulched it well, and then, well, I guess she put the edging in after. But there's actually 3 beds here with grass pathways between. Even the grass she changed to mostly clover. And this garden picture was taken 2 or 3 years after it was installed, but after the initial installation and it got established, she never watered that again. It only gets the rain that falls from nature. So it's a good example of picking the right plants for the right place and picking low maintenance plants. And just a final thought, there's nothing saying you can't have your ornamentals and vegetables all mixed together. There's, a tomato is a beautiful plant, and the fruit, of course, is quite wonderful. And cabbages and ornamental lettuces and things make great additions to flower beds. We're always looking for those big structural plants. So why not something like a cabbage? And mix them together. There's no rules that say you can't. And that is it. Thank you very much. So we can open it up to questions if you want to turn your microphones back on. I've put you all to sleep. I'm sorry.
No, you haven't.
So are there any questions?
Sorry, can I butt in and ask? I should put my video. Sorry, I was
There.
saving it. If you have an existing garden and now you've learned from a talk that maybe, you might want to change it, would you recommend doing it gradually or like all at once?
That's totally up to you. I mean, depends how energetic you are. Sometimes a clean starts the way to go, but it's also a major chore, especially if you have to take plants out and keep them alive. So sometimes if you can make the new part of the bed and then just gradually move things over and divide things, because then it's not a panic if you've got everything dug up and you're going, okay, now I got called away. What am I going to do with my plants? They're going to be sitting here in the sun. So
that makes sense.
Better if you have the bed prepared and can put them in right away. Yeah, Karen.
So along the same line, so I started a new bed that's in a much sunnier location than the rest of my plants, and it's turned out really, really well. So I've expanded, I started it earlier this year, expanded it just today. Some of the plants I put in the first part actually need to be moved because they're too close together. And I've got a few dahlias that aren't doing well in the shady section that should move up to this new bed. Is it too late given the weather? Like if I water really well and use a root hormone, do you think there's hope?
There's hope. There's definitely hope. But if you can look at the forecast and find 2 or 3 days in a row that it's going to be overcast or even rain in the forecast, like right now, it looks like it could rain Friday, Saturday. I mean, I don't trust the weatherman the way it's been going this year, but that's something I would try and plan for, that if you can do it when it's not going to be too hard on the plants. But especially if you can get a big enough root ball and water it the night before so that it's not in a drought condition when you dig it up.
Yeah.
And then move it to its new home right away and get it, watered, and do that in the evening if you can, opposed to it in high noon. All those little things you know to do to help your plant.
Okay. I mean, some
It
of
can be
it,
done. I've
some of it
moved plants in the hottest day in July.
yeah, okay. I mean, some of them I don't have much to lose, like they have to be separated anyway. I
Yeah,
might as well give it a try, right? If they're
exactly.
thinned out, so,
And I mean, prune some back too, if they're tall. I mean, they're gonna look ratty anyways because of the move. They're gonna be pouting, so give them a haircut, and then they're not trying to keep all that foliage alive. Let them put their energy into the root structure again.
okay, I'll give it a try.
Yep. Yep, Carolyn.
So I have a west-facing raised garden that's attached to the side of the house. And last year, I was really happy how it looked, but I have some perennial geranium, crane's bill in there. Last year, they were just a perfect size. This year, they want to take over the world. Is there anything else that has that kind of structure that you could recommend that stays tidier and doesn't sprawl out? And if anybody wants some perennial geranium, please let me know.
Oh, no, I can.
Well,
I'm digging it all out.
Well, first off, you can't tar all perennial geraniums with the same brush because there are some really well-behaved ones, but you have to do your research. Like something like Sweet Heidi's, a pretty pink with a white eye that she's pretty well behaved. And I've got a little tiny one that is called Crystal Rose, and she's not a sprawler. She will send a shoot up, but then it's just another flower. It's supposed to I love Roseanne, but she's a sprawler. She takes up a lot of real estate when she gets going. Nice that she blooms all summer, but she's a sprawler. Now, if you can find it, poppy mallow is good for that kind of location.
Poppy mallow?
Poppy mallow or wine cups is its other common name. And if you want the Latin name, it's Callirrhoe involucrata. But
that's okay.
That's okay. Okay, look for poppy mallow. It's got a beautiful fuchsia burgundy cup-shaped flower, and it does a bit of a sprawl too, but it's still from a central rosette. It's not like it's going to fill the whole bed. It's just that's the plant habit. So other things can grow around it.
Because it's not a very big bed, so I'm trying to keep things in proportion.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know which variety of crane's bill I have, but it's just really big and aggressive. So
yeah, like Biocovo or Phoebe Noble. I mean, those are all beautiful, but they're the kind that you want as a ground cover that you can take a lawnmower to when they get ratty and then they come up again, and in a meadow or something, but not in a flower bed because like you said, they just want to take over the world.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Burning questions today. So I have a really nice shrub rose that was doing so beautifully and has been eaten by gypsy moth. So now I have branches with little green tufts at the end where new growth has come. It obviously has to get pruned back really hard because it has nothing except at the top. How far back can I take it?
Oh, my dear, I don't know what to say about your poor rose because it's just going to get its foliage coming out and then the Japanese beetle are going to come and eat it.
Oh, no.
I mean, this year the pests are amazing. I do a lot of master gardener answering questions for gardeners, and earwigs are crazy this year. Rose chafers are crazy this year. Sawfly, and of course now the gypsy moth. So I don't know if it's the end of the world or what.
It kind of feels like that between ticks and all the rest of it.
Yeah,
You think if I cut off like a third at the top, all the way around?
I'm hesitant to say that because that you need foliage, right? You need foliage to feed it. And if you cut off what is there, is it gonna have enough energy to still put out new foliage?
It's got like this much.
Yeah. But it will branch out again from all those other leaf nodes. So I would leave it for now.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. I'd leave it for now. Just give it some water. Don't
Yeah, I would-
overwater it. Well, I mean, it's drought still, so, but
Right.
without foliage, it's not expiring or transpiring water as much. So,
Okay.
you know,
Mm. It just is the most pathetic looking thing.
oh, I can imagine.
You
Poor
just want
thing.
to, I don't know.
Did on the video. That's fine.
That doesn't mute you, Pat.
Okay, you're all experts now.
Doesn't mute you.
If only it were that easy.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll go again.
Okay.
Yeah, so what do you recommend in terms of design for a long, narrow strip? In terms of how you balance, like, I think we all have an idea of colors that coordinate and everything, but in terms of, like, I'm thinking down at our cenotaph when we have plantings kind of on three sides, and they're kind of long, narrow structures. Is there something that we should be looking for to create balance, interest?
Well,
Could you
is
just come
it,
down to Sterling and have a look? 'Cause that'd be great.
Come on down, yeah.
Okay.
you can send a picture to our master gardener helpline and they'll look at it, but,
I mean, because some of the trees and shrubs and plants are lovely,
yeah.
but we've been talking about, creating a little more, design.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking of maybe some upright conifers in, positioned throughout the beds, maybe not perfectly balanced, but something that's gonna add more height to the gardens. Is it the kind of gardens that people will be respectful of and walk around, or is it the kind of thing that people might walk through?
Well, you guys can say as well, but I mean, and that's where remembrance services are held. So there's grass there. There are two center, what would you call those? The circles?
Memorials or.
Well, the circles that have that, we planted the.
Oh, right,
The
right.
hydrangeas.
Circular beds.
There, so it's more like that. The center, I think, all works. It's what's on the side, and there are some very established trees there. What are their Glenn and Lois know everything that's in there. Really established. What, 9 barks?
Yes.
Crab
Smoke.
apples.
That's
Okay, so it
close
sounds
to
like you
you.
have some height already in those beds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it just. But it's how to balance it all. If things are. Not sure exactly what I'm asking.
Okay, well, if you've got like a red colored 9 bark here, maybe you want to have a sand cherry or something of almost a similar structure and color, just to balance it out. It doesn't have to be necessarily exactly opposite, but one in each bed may be of the same color, and then something with the golden foliage of the same color, or same texture. Like you said, the conifers or something. And again, like I said, repetition. So if you've got a big clump of David phlox or something here, then maybe have it balanced with, another clump in each of the other 2 beds. So that you get that repetition and the color and the shapes.
Yeah. Okay.
Any more questions? Mary Ann, on behalf of the Horticultural Society, I want to thank you for your presentation. And you did say we could see it again on YouTube? Did you
Yes,
not?
I will finish, I'll turn off the recording and I have to do the trimming of it. And yeah, I can definitely send that link to Sue, I guess.
Great.
Because there's a lot of information, and I'm of the age where I might not remember it all, but I did really.
That's
And I
not an
think
age thing.
because
That's information overload.
Yeah. So thank you very much. and we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And
Okay, no problem.
It was a
So,
great presentation.
yeah.
Really well done.
I'll leave the Zoom on if you have a business meeting that you need to conduct.
Miss-
You can turn that over to Judy then.
Okay, and I'll just leave you to it.
Thanks again, Mary Ann.
Thank you.
Thanks,
You're
Lovely.
welcome.
Thank you.
I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, take care.
Yep.